That's just how I am. Have you ever said that before? My name's Galel Fajardo. I'm a high performance business coach, and today we're going to talk about the lie of I'm just wired this way. I want to talk to you about how that belief is keeping you stuck. Now, some of the common phrases that I've heard clients use when they've been talking about themselves is, I've always been this way, or, Galel, I'm just not a structured person, or I have ADHD, so of course I'm going to struggle with that, or I'm always late. I've just accepted it. Now, listen, if you identify as someone who's always late, you're always going to be late. If you say, I'll never be a morning person, do you think you're ever going to be a morning person? Of course not, because your identity comes from behavior. So what I want you to do is kind of reframe the way you look at this. One of the things that I would encourage you to do is to understand the fact that we are so committed to the story of who we are that we oftentimes don't give ourselves permission to become somebody different, right? The example I often tell people is there was an alcoholic father who had two sons. One son became an alcoholic because his father was an alcoholic. The other son never drank alcohol because his father was an alcoholic. Right? This is an example of giving yourself permission to become someone different, not pretending and not faking, but actually like following a real transformation. But it begins with this little mustard seed of faith, right? That you can believe that you can change and that you're not stuck. See, my wake-up call was the fact that I thrived in chaos, right? Last-minute deadlines, I was always pulling them off. I was overscheduled, just had so much on my plate, and I muscled through all the time. But what happened was I was always behind. I was always chasing something. What was I chasing? Who knows? Busyness. I was always apologizing for screwing up and showing up late. I was always forgetting things and missing opportunities. And I wrote it off as an excuse, just saying, listen, I'm just wired that way. And then one day I had somebody near and dear to me that said, hey, what if you're not screwed up, Galel? You're just building around dysfunction and calling it your personality. And it hit me so hard because it was so true. And so I want you to kind of look at things a little bit differently, right? I want you to understand that beliefs are not facts. Beliefs are thoughts that you've rehearsed so many times that it feels like they're true. Some examples of this can be, I'm not a morning person. I always procrastinate. I am not detail-oriented. I don't follow through. I'm creative, not structured. Or I'm very structured, I'm not creative. All of these traits, ideas, they're all learned, they're trainable, and the fact is that they're all changeable. Jim Rohn often said, hey, you're not a tree, you can change, right? And so I want you to understand you're not wired in a specific way. Right now, do we have certain traits that come to us from our parents, genetically and through our family tree? Of course, there's certain things that we may be predisposed to. Is there nature versus nurture in certain instances and the way we build up certain habits? Of course. But what happens is just because we were trained a certain way doesn't mean we have to stay that way. We can always make adjustments. So for example, let's say you grew up in a home that was chaotic. You will likely model chaos. And so that means that you need to be on the lookout for where chaos shows up in your life, because if that was your example growing up, you're experiencing it now as an adult, you're carrying that through, you have to look for those examples and find where you can make those adjustments. If you were praised as a child or praised as an adult for being the creative one, you're going to lean on that identity. But the fact is that these are not fixed traits. They are trained behaviors, and what has been trained can be retrained. This should give you a huge sense of freedom, understanding that however you are today does not have to be who you are tomorrow. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy to make change, but it's going to take some work for you to do it, right? If you can work at it, you can improve it. So what I want you to do is start designing the persona that you want to become to achieve the goals that you want. Because I like to look at our personality, our our mindset as an operating system, right? So we've got these beautiful cell phone devices, right? And every so often, Apple or Google will send out an operating system upgrade. Okay, we found a bug, we're updating it. Here's the upgrade to the operating system. So it goes from 1.0 to 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. I want you to look at this as you upgrading your current mindset operating system. That's what we're going to be doing here. And now, if you're somebody who has ADHD, trauma, neurodivergent, these are real things. I'm not telling you that your trauma doesn't exist. I'm not telling you that you don't have ADHD or social anxiety. But what I want you to understand is that those labels, diagnoses, right? Diagnoses, right? They are not prison sentences. Your label can help you explain your patterns, but it should never excuse your inaction, or it should never excuse poor behaviors. That door's open, right? You just have to walk out of the cage. And so a big shift happened for me when I got labeled as ADHD. I got to determine whether I was going to stay locked up in this cage labeled ADHD because some medical professional said that I fit some diagnostic criteria, and then there's this cage. I can choose whether to walk out of it or not. I want you to walk out of the cage that you may have built. Now, here's a real game. The game is not how do I cope with this forever, but instead it needs to be how do I build a life that works with how I am currently wired without letting it define me. This is the key thing. So I want you to begin with an identity first transformation. Don't start with what should I do? I want you to start with who would I be if I believed something different. So for example, some shifts that you can make. Maybe you have an old idea of I'm not a systems guy. You can shift that to I build systems because my brain needs clarity. Your old belief could be I'm always late. You can move that to I respect my time and others. You can have an old belief that says I work best under pressure versus a new belief that says I work best when I'm calm, clear, and in control. Now, the tendency, the idea, the thought may be that you need to white knuckle these beliefs. You don't do that. Do not white knuckle these beliefs. What happens is, and what's going to increase your confidence, is you practice them. You catch yourself doing the old thing and remind yourself, oh yeah, I'm going to be modeling a different behavior, and you course correct. And so you practice them, you model them, and your brain eventually catches up. Now, most people don't have a strategy issue. Okay, what happens is they have this identity problem, right? So what they do is they buy a planner, they buy an expensive CRM, they get a calendar, they may even hire a coach like me. But what happens is, and this is why they run into trouble, is they don't change who's using the tool, right? If you believe I'm chaotic, you're going to turn every system that you get from your coach into chaos. If you say I am inconsistent, you're going to quit when things feel too routine. Your identity must shift first before strategy can stick. So for me, when I'm working with a client and they have this ingrained belief that's not serving them, they may wonder, why are you spending so much time on this belief of mine? And it's because I can give you the best advice in the world, but if you don't change that belief, it's going to go to absolute waste. So I want you thinking about how you can start incorporating these shifts into your life so that you can finally live a life where it's enjoyable, right? Not this multi-million-dollar business that's built in burnout or hustling harder or just outworking everybody, but instead being calm, being consistent, being early, being free, not from forcing and white knuckling through this, but instead from training and repetition. So if you're sitting here and you're thinking to yourself, that's just how I am, what that is self-sabotage, right? You're not designed to be broken. You're not designed to just live in chaos. What's happening is you're living with an outdated operating system, and it's time for us to upgrade. And I hope that you watching this video or listening to this audio is the first step for you in upgrading that operating system. And let people get shocked, right? When you show up early, when you're calm under pressure, when you get more done in less time, you don't have to explain it. You don't have to justify anything. You just live it. So if you want some tools to make the shift, that's exactly what I do inside of my private coaching community. I've got support for you. I got structure, got strategies, not for who you are today, but for who you're becoming. So take a look at the link in the description to learn more information. Get on my email list at galel.com and get my private coaching sent to you directly. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next week.